American politics. It's still too early for the Fox News decision desk to project a winner, but we should have a call any moment now, so stay right here with us. You don't want to miss a minute. And while we wait, let's bring in Fox's Brett Baer and Martha McCallum at our election desk to break down the significance of what we're seeing as these numbers trickle in. Guys, take it away.
Laura, so what we're seeing from our decision desk is that the raw numbers that you see on the screen has Roy Moore up over Doug Jones, but you add in the existing counties that are still out and the analysis, the Fox News voter analysis that we have looking at the questions that we asked voters today and over the past couple of days. And right now, Doug Jones, the Democrat, is leading in this Alabama race. Now, it's too close to call, as you just mentioned, but we are seeing kind of a shift that way in the past about hour or so.
Yeah, I mean, we've watched it shift back and forth over the course of the night, essentially. And as Brett says, we've got the raw vote in there. But it's really, I mean, literally, Laura, it is a toss-up. And if you look at all the different barometers that we're covering, it's close to toss-up territory or leaning slightly towards Jones in a lot of the feedback that we're getting. But our numbers show that Roy Moore is up by a slight amount as we wait for these totals to come in from some of these outstanding counties. You know?
Now, I will say there are a few counties where Moore underperformed, where Donald Trump performed. Remember, Donald Trump won Alabama by 28 points over Hillary Clinton, and there are a few key counties where Moore significantly underperformed. In fact, a couple of them where Doug Jones won the county, so that is not a good sign for the GOP. But there are still some Democrat counties that are existing, that are out, that you don't know how Jones is going to perform, and if the numbers don't add up in the raw vote total, then that's why it's so close, and we can't make the call as of yet.
I think it's incredible that there was only 1% of write-in votes so far, it looks like. I mean, you would have thought that with all the publicity for people who, for people who didn't like either choice, there would have been more write-ins, but not. The people went for either Moore or they decided to go for Jones, despite the fact that, a good chunk of people said the allegations really, they did find them disturbing. 51%, according to some of those exit polls, said didn't really affect them at all. Yeah, but I would have expected, Mickey Mouse to be written in.
I would agree, Laura. And, but they got absolutely no direction on that, right? You had Senator Shelby, who said, I'm not going to vote for Roy Moore. I'm going to write in someone, a man of great integrity. So, I mean, there was never any concerted effort, which could have been the way to go. When these allegations first came out, there could have been a directed effort to write in Luther Strange. None of that ever transpired, and they sort of sat back and let things lie as they did, and then the president came over and supported Roy Moore. So, I mean, that's going to be one of the things that they analyze closely if Roy Moore does lose, whether or not they should have, when all of that hit the fan, so to speak, recalibrated and come up with a new plan.
And just to point out that this is just, if Jones pulls this out, and again, we're leaning that way, he's leading at this moment, it's 25 years since a Democrat has won a Senate race in Alabama. And it's a two-year seat. It would be up again in 2020, but this would be earth-shattering when it comes to Alabama politics.
Well, think about Supreme Court nominations that might be coming up. All these judgeships that Trump wants to fill. Obviously, tax reform, the DACA fix, or some kind of deal for the Dreamers. We have Murkowski, Collins, Flake, and McCain still in there. It's not like they have a real kind of working, reliable majority as it is. One less vote. It could be curtains for much of the Trump agenda if this doesn't turn out well for the Republicans tonight. And there's going to be hell to pay, I think.
If Doug Jones wants to get reelected, one would think that he wouldn't be the traditional Democrat in a number of the voting stances he takes. If he wants to get reelected in Alabama, one would think he would be more like a Manchin or Heidecamp. They haven't moved yet, but there have to be issues where they kind of change their colors if they're going to appeal to those states.
But I mean, if you think about that, Republican voters have been elated that they finally have the White House, the Senate, and the House of Representatives. Now they've got an Alabama Senate seat that they could potentially lose, which puts a lot of that agenda in jeopardy. And that's what President Trump was talking about when he supported Roy Moore. He never said, I really like this guy. I think he's fantastic. He said, we need to have him in there if we want to get my agenda through. So, I mean, this is, if this happens, and we need to stress that we don't know yet. I know it sounds like, our indications are sort of at crosswise because you have the popular vote, which everybody's looking at on the screen, which is showing Moore slightly ahead. And then you have some of the other indicators that show that it is leaning closer to Jones. But if Jones wins this, I mean, there's going to be a lot of soul searching on the Republican side.
But tax reform vote will happen. If the government doesn't shut down and taxes move forward in the next week or two, this senator, whoever it is, Jones or Moore, is not going to be sworn in until January. Right. That's the Secretary of State of Alabama. As of now, December 26th would be the day that everything gets certified.
Yeah, and I think right now there are going to be a lot of Monday morning quarterbacking. McConnell's role in all of this. He jumped in big for Luther Strange. A lot of the Alabama people like Mo Brooks and others, and I think a lot of them were knocked out in that special election runoff. And I think there's going to be a lot of people asking a lot of tough questions all the way around. And we appreciate both Brett and, of course, Martha's continued analysis and reporting. And for more analysis, let's bring in Fox News contributor Byron York here in Washington, the former chair of the Alabama GOP, Marty Connors, in Birmingham, and the chair of the Faith and Freedom Coalition, Ralph Reed, in Atlanta. Ralph, I want to go to you because your group and others like it tried to really mobilize the evangelical vote in Alabama tonight for Roy Moore. But we don't know yet, but it's looking like it's going to be tougher for Roy Moore than a lot of people thought. He might lose this seat. If that happens, what do you take away from this?
Well, if you look at the exit polls, Laura, it indicates that about 44% of the vote is conservative evangelical, and they voted 81% for Roy Moore and only about mid-teens for Doug Jones. So that vote came in for him. I would have frankly expected him to hit a little bit higher, maybe mid-80s, maybe even high 80s. But 81% is enough. What really is going to decide the outcome of this race is two things. Number one, how bad is the bleeding in Jefferson County and Birmingham in those more moderate and centrist suburban Republican precincts? The 63% of that vote is in right now, and it's overwhelmingly Jones.
Yeah, it's brutal. Both counties look brutal. I can tell you that right now. They both look brutal. I mean, for Roy Moore, it's the suburban. A lot of women.
Yeah.
We got to get Byron in here and Marty. But Byron, a lot of women turning out. Suburban women, Vestavia Hills, Birmingham area, very upscale. A lot of them couldn't hold their nose and vote for Moore.
I was in Vestavia Hills a few weeks ago. Saw a lot of Jones signs. Yep. Saw 0 Roy Moore signs. I think this is going to come down to whether this ended up being an election about Roy Moore. Now remember, Roy Moore was elected in 2012 in the Supreme Court election with 51.76 of the vote. This guy does not get landslides in Alabama. Or was it going to be Republicans voting strategically saying we got to keep 52 votes in the Senate? And it looks now like it's more of a referendum on Roy Moore himself. Marty, your state, it's been 2 decades plus since a Democrat won a Senate seat there. Tell us about what's happening, why this is turning out the way it is in the reddest of red states, we thought.
Well, I think the main reason, I have to kind of agree with Ralph in a different way, it's that suburban Republican voter that has either stayed at home or decided to do something significantly different. So this is ultimately, it's not a referendum on the Republican Party, it's a referendum on some accusations, and I think that's what it may come down to. I think it's 1.3 that is now a write-in vote with a projected, I think, 2-point win by Jones, and so the write-in also had an impact as well.
Byron, I want to go back to you about the McConnell involvement early on. They poured a lot of money in for Luther Strange, and early on people were saying, it might not have been the best idea. It kind of pushed people to the more right-wing side of the equation with more versus more of a mainstream conservative like the guy I endorse, which is Mo Brooks?
Well, the majority leader was hugely unpopular in Alabama, and after the primary, when there was these postmortems going on to see what were Luther Strange's biggest problems, his biggest problem was how he received the Senate seat from the governor, Robert Bentley, the former governor who resigned in scandal. But his second biggest problem was Mitch McConnell, extremely unpopular with Alabama Republicans.
And I wonder, Marty, your take on this. The establishment GOP in Washington, did they tilt this in a way that gave this wide running room to someone like a Roy Moore? And then the Democrats went in there and they, these women came out, and then it was, kind of off to the races. Again, it's too close to call. It's basically dead even right now, but this turnout in some of these key counties looks like it's going to be fairly negative to Roy Moore at this point.
Well, you're right. If you go to any watering hole in, let's say, suburban Alabama or rural Alabama, everybody there is very, very angry at Washington, and they're blaming the Republicans, which is the rise of Roy Moore in this race. Had, let's say, tax reform been passed 2 months ago, 3 months ago, this would not have been an issue. Had Obamacare been repealed or replaced, this would not have been an issue. So I think the lack of action has also created the success of Roy Moore. So what I'm watching for now is in the final minutes, hours of this race, Alabama is very similar to Georgia in the sense, Ralph. Birmingham will give Jones a 40+ thousand margin, just like Atlanta does, and then the rest of Alabama has to catch up with that margin. The question is, can they? And underperforming in counties where Roy should do better, suburbs of Huntsville, Fairhope down in Baldwin County, right now it doesn't look like it's trending that way.
Ralph, I want you to touch on that, and also what Brett was talking about earlier. If indeed Jones pulls out this, big victory tonight, if he does, would he have all this pressure on him to be kind of the centrist Democrat and maybe even support Donald Trump on some issues? Or is he going to say, I'll take 2 years, I'm not going to get reelected anyway, probably. I'm going to take 2 years and do all the kind of more liberal stuff that my party wants me to do?
I think there are going to be counter pressures, and I think he's going to be sort of if he were to win tonight, he'd be sort of a southern fried version of a Joe Manchin in West Virginia, where, he'll throw a vote every now and again like he did on Gorsuch.
Not much.
But not much. On Obamacare, he voted with Schumer. On the tax cut, he voted with Schumer. And look, we don't know what's going to happen tonight, Laura. This is a very, very close race. It is on a knife's edge. But if Roy Moore is able to pull it out, it will be because on these issues, taxes, Obamacare, judicial nominations, the life issue, that Doug Jones was not a centrist. He was not a Sam Nunn, Zell Miller, or that kind of Democrat. He was a hardcore liberal Democrat. And even with all these accusations and everything swirling around Moore, voters of faith and other conservatives and pro-lifers were torn over the overall dynamics. But on the issues, Moore was with them.
Byron?
Well, I think Ralph actually is right about, because Doug Jones is not just going to become an old-fashioned centrist Democrat like in the 1970s.
No, those days are over.
That just ain't going to happen.
Those days are over.
And the problems with trying to rule the Senate with 51 votes is going to be really, really tough for Mitch McConnell.
Guys, great analysis. And by the way, when the Democrats can't win at the ballot box, they're going to use any means necessary to gain power, and now they're trying to unseat Trump, exactly as I told you they would do last week. Stay here. Explosive details up next. I hate to say, see, I told you so, but I told you so. It's all unfolding exactly as I said it would. On December 6th, when Senate Democrats were giving Al Franken the bums rushed, based on allegations of impropriety he almost entirely denied. What did I say? Now, before you join the march up the castle, to the Castle Frankenstein to capture the monster, I have a word of caution. They've come down with a sudden case of feverish morality, but what it really is nothing more than a political calculation by the Dems. They have two paths to destroy the president. The first is the Mueller investigation. The second way they're going to try to destroy the Trump presidency is the war on women. Yeah, that old saw. They have now determined that it's worth sacrificing Franken, just like they did John Conyers, throw him overboard to save the political Titanic that is their party. Now, one, what does this do? It sets the precedent for the Democrats to try to drive Roy Moore from office should he win the Alabama Senate race. And two, this is the next step in the quest to impeach President Trump. And let me tell you, bingo, like clockwork, it was a coordinated re-airing of the grievances. That began just yesterday, complaints by the same Trump accusers that voters had already heard from before they elected our 45th president. Then, with impeccable timing, a quartet of Democratic senators called on the president to resign. Never mind that the president has long denied the charges, 130 years old, and that there was nothing new in any of them. And in the dangerous climate we have today that the liberals have created, allegations are enough to strip anyone, especially any man, of his career. Senator Kirsten Gillibrand is the de facto leader now of the Get Trump crusade. Do you remember her voicing such plaintive concern for Bill Clinton's accusers when he was appearing at her fundraisers? Neither do I. And more troubling, women who are part of the Trump administration seem to be kind of hedging their bets. On Sunday, UN Ambassador Nikki Haley had the perfect opportunity to stand up for the president really strongly and call out this politically motivated hysteria. Instead, she kind of took a pass.
Women who accuse anyone should be heard. They should be heard and they should be dealt with. And I think we heard from them prior to the election. And I think any woman who has felt violated or felt mistreated in any way, they have every right to speak up.
And women who see themselves as presidential material need to be heard most of all. Today, NBC's Megyn Kelly, in what seems to be a new daily feature, showcased another of the old Trump accusers.
I demand that he's subjected to an investigation by the Ethics Committee. I think it's important that we hold this man to the highest of standards. And if 16 women have come forward, then why hasn't anything been done? Where is our investigation?
It's curious, don't you think, how this accuser issued a call for an investigation just as 59 House Democrats released a letter demanding a congressional investigation into these allegations against the president. I'm sure it's all just a total coincidence. Well, here's the reality. Congressional Democrats know that time is not on their side. While Roy Moore was still in the headlines and the Me Too-itis was still all the rage, the liberals had to move. They had to make their move now. You got the booming economy, you got consumer confidence rising, you got these trade deals being renegotiated, you have Trump judges getting confirmed. Things are looking up for the president. So the Democrats needed a new storyline, and this is it. But my friends, do not be fooled. For the party of Ted Kennedy and Bill Clinton, this sexual misconduct crusade has never been about protecting women. It's about taking back power by any means necessary. So now that Mueller's impeachment report is at least somewhat tainted and the president is scoring some big wins, Dems needed chum in the water. This is it. So I say let them eat their own if they wish, but they cannot be allowed to kill off their political adversaries with unproven allegations. And female politicians and activists should also be really careful where they take this. Because someday, maybe, men might decide to turn the tables on them and start launching their own, maybe it's called #MenToo movement, with wild, decades-old complaints against women in positions of power. You don't think it could happen? Just watch. then who's going to be left to call for some modicum of due process or fairness before lives are destroyed? And that's the angle. Let's go right to Brett and Martha as we have breaking news. Brett, Martha, what do we know?
Indeed we do, Laura. We can now call the race in Alabama. Fox News is now projecting that Doug Jones will defeat Republican Roy Moore to become the first Alabama Democrat in a quarter century to be elected to the United States Senate.
This is a dramatic Democratic upset in deep red Alabama, and it cuts the GOP Senate majority from 52 to 51. Further dimming Republican hopes of enacting major legislation backed by President Trump. But as we pointed out, it's likely that tax reform is going to be voted on in the conference committee prior to the seating of this senator.
You know, there was a lot of discussion about whether or not a Roy Moore win would be a win, really, for the GOP. And there are some questions tonight about whether or not there's some silver lining perhaps for Republicans tonight. A victory by Moore, who is embroiled in a sex scandal, might have made it more difficult for the GOP to gain control of the Senate in next year's midterm elections. And, you know, we have watched as Democrats have made that a major talking point in recent weeks.
Looking live now.
Pointing the finger at sort of a war on women, too, with regard to this. Brett.
Looking live at the Moore headquarters in Montgomery and the Jones headquarters in Birmingham. This word just getting out as we are making this race. Joining us tonight to break down the race, Chris Wallace, Britt Hume, Dana Perino, and Juan Williams. Chris, we haven't heard from you yet. Let's start with you on this election result.
Well, look, this is a big win for the Democrats. They went all in. They had a major get-out-the-vote effort when you started seeing people like Deval Patrick and Cory Booker going down there this last weekend to try to mobilize the African-American vote when President Obama, former Vice President Biden made robocalls over the weekend. They were really going all in. They realized they had a once-in-a-generation chance to win a Senate seat in Alabama, and they went for it. And it's significant, obviously. A two-vote majority has been pretty tough to govern with in the Senate. Now it's going to be a one-vote majority, 51-49. On the other hand, I've got to tell you, I talked to some top officials, even in the Trump administration, who weren't sure. Yes, they wanted the vote. They wanted Moore to win, but they also feared the burden that he would put on the party. They look back at Todd Akin, who made the comments about legitimate rape as a Republican candidate for the Senate in Missouri in 2012, and that was a kind of poster boy for the Republicans running in that election. They worried about Roy Moore and that it would just be a constant burden, albatross, that they would have to deal with, and that every time a senator walked down a corridor, what do you think about Roy Moore? What's going to happen in the ethics investigation? Are you going to vote to expel him? So on the one hand, yes, they'd rather have won than lost. But on the other hand, they also thought that Roy Moore in the Senate was going to be a real burden for them in what promises to be a tough midterm election in 2018.
Let's bring in Britt Hume. Britt, do you agree that perhaps a Roy Moore victory would not have been worth it for the GOP?
Well, that was why I've been saying all along, Martha, that there were two bullets aimed at the Senate Republicans tonight, and the question was which one would hit them. Well, the one that hit them is the one that cost them a seat. But as Chris has ably suggested, a Moore win would have been no bed of roses either. So I totally agree with that assessment, and I would add one more thought for everyone, and that is, what does this mean for the great Steve Bannon, a man we've been given to believe was a master political strategist? He would like everyone to think that he's the man whose wisdom got Donald Trump elected, although Donald Trump obviously doesn't like to hear that. But he went down and he really did go all in for Roy Moore. And this is a state where it's very hard for Republicans to lose, and his man lost, and he lost as a result of the fact that enough people in Alabama thought enough of what those women said about Roy Moore that they didn't want him as their senator, and that is the result tonight. So it remains to be seen how this will affect the standing of Steve Bannon, who is, we thought was a pretty big player outside the White House.
Britt, quickly, you covered the last Democrat, Howell Heflin, to win in Alabama. It's been a long time.
Yeah, it's been quite a long time. I remember Hal Heflin well, and of course, Hal Heflin, while he was a Democrat, was of a Democratic breed that no longer really exists. Hal Heflin was pretty conservative on a lot of issues, and he wasn't somebody that the Democratic leadership could always count on. I think looking at Roy Moore's record, he will be pretty much a down-the-line vote for the things the Democratic leadership really wants. I mean, Doug Jones. I'm sorry. Yes, of course. So I think this is not somebody that the Republicans will be easily able to win over. On the other hand, it seems fair to say that from day one, he will be among the most vulnerable Democrats in the Senate the next time around.
Dana, what does this say about sexual harassment charges? Roy Moore was one of the few that we've seen in recent weeks who actually tried to fight it, who said that they're not true, these allegations are false, and he lost.
Right. So I think that based on what we've heard from our voter analysis and then also just from the outcome is that his denials were not credible enough. But also I think that we're in an era of political disruption. So nobody thought that Trump could win at the beginning in that June of 2015. He's our president. A Democrat hasn't been elected in Alabama in 25 years. This is also, I think, just a very specific circumstance. Without these allegations, I think Roy Moore would definitely be the senator from Alabama instead of Jones. I think that one thing to look at is the turnout pattern similar to that in Virginia gubernatorial race that happened just last month, in which Ed Gillespie, the Republican, lost big time in Virginia. And one of those things to look at is that President Trump in Virginia won married women by 10 points. Ed Gillespie lost it by, or only won it by 1 point, and he lost so big there. That said, the 2018 map for the Republicans in the Senate is very, very good. I think that they will retain the majority. They also think that they have a possible couple of pickup opportunities, like in Missouri and Indiana. They're worried a little bit about Nevada. Tennessee, they're pretty sure about Tennessee, but they've got a strong candidate, the Democrats do, in Phil Bredesen. One thing we know for sure, while McConnell's position had been to always support the incumbents, there's going to be a lot of focus on candidate recruitment, the quality of candidates going forward, and you can bet that 2018 will be a very expensive race. Yeah.
Juan.
Well, to me, this is a red state, and everybody's going to talk about Jones and the appeals of the Democrats, even Charles Barkley, the basketball superstar who went to Auburn, who was in there last night campaigning for Jones. But what strikes me is picking up on what Dana was talking about, which is suburban Republicans, especially women, who, according to all that we can see tonight, outside of Birmingham, even outside of Montgomery, were quick to decide either to stay home or to vote for Jones. This is a surprise. And this suggests that this argument, some call it a civil war within the Republican ranks, is really at a boiling point. And that's why Steve Bannon is such an important player here. Remember, Steve Bannon persuaded the president to back Roy Moore. The president had backed Luther Strange. And it was Steve Bannon who was taking on the Senate Majority Leader of the Republican Party, Mitch McConnell. And I believe just recently said there's a special place in hell for people who are Republicans who did not back Roy Moore. So what we have here now going into 18 is, yes, it is a good landscape for Republicans because they have more seats that they're holding while Democrats have more seats that are open. But to my mind, what you're looking at is Democrats anticipating a wave in the midterms of 2018 and thinking that this is more evidence that Donald Trump and Steve Bannon are hurting the Republican Party. Not anything that Democrats are doing, because I don't think Democrats have a strong message or even strong candidates in many places. It's what's going on within the Republican Party and how Republicans, especially Republican women, feel about the party at this moment.
You acknowledge that this race was unique in the sense that it had to do a lot with these allegations. It didn't have to do with the Trump agenda. If you put the Trump agenda up in an election in Alabama, it would be an overwhelming win.
But here's the thing. So if Trump backed Luther Strange should have won over Roy Moore. Instead, Steve Bannon backed Roy Moore, and Roy Moore beat the Trump candidate. Then Steve Bannon's calling the Oval Office and saying to the president, you made a mistake. Jared Kushner misled you. You should be backing Roy Moore. He's the populist, and you're a populist president. This is, to quote Martha, the guy who's going to discombobulate, shake up the establishment. And look what happened tonight.
It's going to be interesting to see the fallout here, and we're going to toss it back to Laura. But Laura, to your point on your angle, I think that this is going to embolden Democrats to use this issue specifically against this president. And you're already seeing it, as you predicted last week, but it's only intensifying in recent days.
Yeah, I'd like to hear from the panel about this, Brett. Maybe Brett Hume can weigh in on this. If they're able to take out a Senate candidate in Alabama with these allegations, as lurid as they were, what does this mean for the umpteen number of Democrats who will inevitably come forward to urge the president to resign? The constant re-airing of the old allegations that were aired last October 2016, and putting this pressure, Britt, all the way to 2018 midterm elections, the war on woman redux. I think we see this all the way through 2018.
Well, we may, Laura, but there's one thing that is clear here, and that is that whether you believe the women or not, nothing new really has emerged about Donald Trump. What we're hearing is a re-airing of allegations that were made before the election. And the voters had a chance to judge them and judge him accordingly. And they decided, whether you like it or not, that he should be the president. So it's, one thing that a news story like this requires is news. And endless repetition of the same old charges, I don't think really moves the ball very much. And I'm not sure how long this latest spate of repeated accusations can last. Now, I could be wrong about this, but my sense about this is that absent something new and something more recent, these are likely to die down.
And Chris Wallace, we have the ongoing Mueller investigation at the same time. The other cudgel to hit this president with as time goes on in the next year may wrap up soon, may go on another couple of years. We don't know. But that's the other boiling point here in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, I want to go back to something, though, that Dana said, Laura, and that is that the map, and just in terms of the schedule, because 2018, it's all the people who won in 2012 when Obama was reelected. Democrats have to defend 25 seats. Republicans only have to defend 10 seats. So the Republicans are going to be playing offense. Democrats are going to be playing defense. And, I find it hard to think that somebody is going to lose in a state, a Republican candidate who's got no charges of sexual harassment against him, or frankly, anything to do with the Russian collusion because of people's feelings about Trump. That maybe on the issues they might vote against him, but if you're running in, as a Republican incumbent in some state, in a red state this time, I find it hard to think that if you don't have that, we had a perfect storm in Alabama. Yes, there were allegations against Donald Trump, but there were also very serious, new, fresh allegations against Roy Moore. If you don't have that kind of baggage, and you certainly aren't going to have any baggage in terms of Russian collusion, I just don't know how that carries over into Senate races.
And Dana, on the issue of substance that Juan brought up, saying that this is a kind of a referendum on Trumpism, like I would take issue with that, obviously in Alabama, as Brett said. But, going forward with the immigration, trade deals, deregulatory efforts, judges, where does this leave the Republican Party when you have a Flake, Murkowski, Collins, and McCain, who are obviously on many issues really on the opposite side of Donald Trump?
Well, I think in many ways, actually, the president's in pretty good shape on that, as Brett has been saying all night, that the tax reform bill is going to get voted on, most likely, before Jones has ever sat. And I'm not convinced that he wouldn't have voted for it anyway. But let's just say, they get tax reform done. Then the president has said he wants to move on and do border security, immigration, and an infrastructure bill. The Democrats want to work on an infrastructure bill. There's nothing here that would change the path of judges. And on trade, I think that the president actually can do a lot just administratively. So actually, the president has, I think, a decent case to make that the end of his first year, he's accomplished a lot. The people feel good about the economy. The consumer confidence is high. Stock market is high. Unemployment is low. Everything is sort of going his way economically. So I think that it's very hard to disrupt that right now. And if the Democrats they're going to have to defend all of those seats that Chris Wallace was talking about. They might be able to pick up a couple of places. I think the thing to really think about is the candidate recruitment. In some of these places, talking about the House side for a second, you have up to 17, 18, 19 people running in some of these Democratic primaries. That's going to pull a lot of those Democrats way to the left. But we saw in the presidential election in 2016, that's not where the country is. I think Alabama is definitely just an outlier. Do think voter patterns are interesting to maybe compare to Virginia governor's race. But ultimately, Roy Moore, this is allegations that he could not overcome. This is specific to him. Yeah. He's the one who lost the race.
And Juan, remember that first interview he did with Sean Hannity? That has to have been one of the worst interviews. We were on radio and TV that day, like, oh my gosh, like he's further incriminated himself. Remember he said, well, I always ask the mother's permission whether to date the young girl. Well, I don't know what he called it. But
he said not generally. Generally, I don't date teenagers.
Yeah,
I mean, he's not helping himself.
That was a terrible answer. He did not. That began, I think, his downfall gradually. That interview was terrible for him.
Well, it was. In fact, I thought he made a comeback from it. I mean, at certain points, it looked like, that people were putting it in the past. And then the context here is so important because you had the Harvey Weinstein stuff, but then it really accelerated and you had Democrats and a lot of the Hollywood elites get involved. And it was easy to play into a narrative that said, we in Alabama, one, don't believe the elitist Washington Post and all the Washington establishment that's out to tell us what to do and looks down on us. But Roy Moore, it seems to me, never was able to stir the idea of a big turnout among the voters he needed to win tonight. Now, there's going to be a lot of talk about this turnout issue because if you look at the numbers, it comes back about, 25% of Alabama voters, of the electorate, turned out for this very high-profile, much-attention special election. And guess what? About 28% of the state's voters are African Americans, mostly in the southern tier. But you're going to see an increased turnout there. This takes me back again to the whole notion of what do Democrats see tonight? Do they have hope, or do they see this as just peculiar and based on Roy Moore and based on the charges against him of sexual improprieties? And what I'm seeing right now is that people are saying, well, look at Virginia. Look at what happened there.
It's a totally different state, Juan.
It's a totally different state. But look, Laura, at exactly where you saw increases in turnout and where you saw people stay home, or you saw in Virginia having to run on the immigration issue. And did it
Wait, but here's the problem. Gillespie is a Bush Republican who late in the game tried to move to Trump's position. That wasn't believable from the outset. He's a Bush Republican.
You
and
a Virginian,
nice guy,
but I'm going to tell you,
that wasn't going to work.
But he tried to play populist Republican Party politics.
It didn't work,
wasn't
though.
him. I think he is a Bush Republican,
Yeah.
but he tried to be a Trump Republican.
Yeah, but he was from New Jersey. I mean, that whole thing didn't work.
You're a tough customer,
Two different
Laura.
states. We got red Alabama and we got basically blue Virginia.
But
It's changed demographically. Immigration, the Beltway is all big government. Voters, they want bigger and bigger government. So I think that comparison is a little wobbly.
Yeah.
But great analysis from the panel. Brett, Martha, thank you so much. Let's get to Fox's Doug McKelway, who's in Birmingham, with the supporters of Democrat Doug Jones. And Peter Ducey's in Montgomery with Republican Roy Moore's campaign. Doug, let's first start with you. Tell us what you know there.
Well, this is as excited a crowd as I have seen in a long time when the projection was announced here. And by the way, I should say this is, as you know, a totally overwhelmingly Democratic crowd. So both of the giant monitors in this room are tuned to CNN. Their projection of victory for Doug Jones came about 10 minutes after Fox News' projection. So they were unaware of the Fox News projection when it happened on CNN. A thunderous round, a brilliant crowd here, people hugging each other, kissing each other, toasting each other, chugging beers and chugging champagne, and it continues to this point. We don't know when Doug Jones is going to make an appearance here. But at this time, I am reminded of the words as well of Mitch McConnell some weeks ago, who said that we've tried the ultra-conservative candidates in the past. He made mention of the 2010 Tea Party candidates Sharon Angle in Nevada and Christine O'Donnell in Delaware, who were not ready for prime time. They proved that, and that may as well be the case here with Judge Moore as well. Him coming out on that horse today to go vote, reminded me of the fact that Alabama is not the perceived backwater that so many of the coastal elites say it is. This is a state which has been progressively moving forward. It is home to the Marshall Space Flight Center. 4 or 5 international automobile manufacturers have made their homes in Alabama. A lot of high-tech manufacturing going on here. People here want to move forward, and they didn't sense that in the Judge Moore campaign. They did sense it in the Doug Jones campaign. And he is every bit as much the law and order kind of a candidate as Judge Moore was, although with more bona fides, you might say. He was born and raised in the state. His father was a steel worker at the U.S. Steel plant here in Birmingham, U.S. attorney, served Senator Heflin Howe, and many other credentials, perhaps most importantly in terms of his appeal to African-American voters. He tried 2 Ku Klux Klansmen who were responsible 3 decades ago for the bombing of the Baptist church here in Birmingham, which resulted in the deaths of 4 little African-American girls. So this is, bottom line, a really, really excited crowd. We don't know when Doug Jones is going to come out, but I suspect that the applause round will be as thunderous as any we've heard tonight when he does.
All right,
Back to you, Laura.
Let's go to Peter Ducey, who's in Montgomery, a much more somber crowd. Peter, we're reminded, a friend of mine who's in Birmingham just messaged me and said, remember that Roy Moore ran twice for governor and lost. And, you know, this is not Mitch McConnell's fault, he said. You know, Moore would have had a hard time winning the nomination in a full primary. We forget all those facts, but there you have it.
But this is not over here at the Moore campaign election night headquarters, Laura. Something extraordinary happened about 2 minutes before you guys came to me. An MC went up to the stage and said to a very somber crowd, I know that some of the networks have started to call the race for Doug Jones, but we are not ready to call it. And the MC then left the stage. They're playing some poppy music right now, trying to get the crowd going. You can see they've still got the New York Times projection that shows the red counties and the blue counties. That went away for a little while because they switched over to the local news that still hadn't called it. But as soon as the race was called, the local affiliate took a shot of Jones headquarters where people were standing behind Doug McElway, celebrating, cheering, drinking beer, and that quickly was taken off of the screen. It is a much different scene here right now. There was a lot of confidence at the beginning of the night. They were calling it the mix and mingle time before Roy Moore got here. But a lot of folks have left. Some who were standing are now sitting. Still haven't seen Roy Moore on the stage, but he is on the premises. And we do expect at some point, if they do concede, which all the networks say at some point is going to be the result, including Fox, we expect to see a big finger pointed at Mitch McConnell. My understanding, talking to folks here and talking to the folks who really, really were trying to help Roy Moore win, if he won, it was going to be thanks to President Trump and all of his support. There was the rally in Pensacola nearby. There was the robocall that was out and even was turned into a radio ad that we heard driving from Birmingham to Montgomery today. But that if Moore lost, it would be squarely McConnell's fault. And so at some point, again, no update on the timing, whether we're going to hear from Moore soon or any of his surrogates soon, but we do expect a singular focus, at least based on what we were hearing before the election was called. They are really mad at the establishment, as they have been, especially Mitch McConnell, and they think that this is his fault.
Peter, my same source in Alabama says Jones is a lame duck from day one. He has zero chance of winning in 2020. This state loves Trump. This is not an anti-Trump result. We'll see how that goes. Pete, go ahead, Peter.
What's interesting, the NRSC chairman, Cory Gardner, is already saying that he hopes that Doug Jones will do the right thing and just start voting with the Republicans in the Senate. We have no indication that would actually happen, but he's trying. Laura.
Yeah, that's funny. All right, Peter, thanks so much. And Fox News has obtained the anti-Trump text by Peter Strzok that led to his ouster from the Bob Mueller special counsel team. 2 heavy hitters weigh in on that. We're going to talk to Alan Dershowitz and Ken Starr. Stay with us.